Obviously, you can see by the turnout that this is a topic that is of great concern in our community. It's one that we need students, parents, school staff to be well informed about. I am thrilled to have students here. I hope each and every one of you will be an ambassador of what you learned tonight and share it with your peers. You are by far the most important educators in the room tonight. So thank you for being here, young people. We really appreciate it. We appreciate parents and school staff being here too. 6:30 is a tough time, but it seems to have worked out for a lot of you. We have an hour and 15 minutes to cover a very important topic. We have excellent speakers who are going to provide you with information that is relevant and very timely to our cases here in Marin. We'll have a question and answer period. We have people in our audience tonight that are doing expert work in the area of marijuana prevention and education and restorative practices. So as questions come up, some of them might feel free to answer and add information. We've got a table full of information outside for you about upcoming events, including a repeat of this on September 24th at the Mill Valley Community Center. So tell your friends who weren't able to be here tonight. They can come to that event. But mostly what we want to do before we start is thank our partners. In Marin County, when a problem comes up that affects our youth, we have to pick up the phone, and within minutes, we have partners ready to help us. That is true of this event tonight. The same day we reached out, we had a full panel ready to go, the folks that you're about to see. So we thank our Marin County Department of Health and Human Services. We thank Bay Area Community Resources, the Marin County Sheriff, who are providing us with our speakers tonight. And we thank many other partners who are in the room tonight that worked with us on keeping our schools safe. There's no bigger charge for our schools than keeping our students safe. And that's what tonight's about. Thank you for being here. Please sign up if you haven't on the sheets outside of the table so we can do a follow-up email to you that will have all the resources you're getting tonight in an electronic format so you can share them and use them. So thank you, and let's get going. Mike, Grant.
All right, thank you, Ken. So thank you very much. Thanks, Ken. We have a panel of experts here tonight, and like Ken said, we're very lucky to have the experts. So Josie Sanguinetti is our awesome school resource officer from the Marin County Sheriff's Office. Have a round of applause for Josie. Melissa Struzzo is our leader at the Marin Prevention Network. She coordinates that program. And have a round of applause for Melissa. And Jasmine Garrity is a little bit formal. Normally we call her Jazzy, but it is Jasmine Garrity from the Bay Area Community Resources and also Marin Healthy Youth Partnership. Round of applause for Jazzy. And with that, let's talk about cannabis and vaping. I'll hand it to you guys.
I'm going to stand. I'm better standing. I have the slide deck for you all here. Great. So basically this slide starts off our presentation because it's called a triangle lemon. You really can't talk about vaping without talking about smoking cigarettes and nicotine and cannabis. So we really wanted to start out with this and kind of set the stage for the whole presentation. There we go, lights, okay. So as I mentioned, we can't talk about vaping without talking about cannabis and smoking cigarettes as well. So we found that, with regards to cigarettes, that youth really have found that the perception of harm is really high. They understand that smoking cigarettes, smoking nicotine is a problem. But what we've seen with the cannabis industry is that and the vape industry have shown that vaping maybe talked about it as a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes. And you've heard a lot, obviously, about cannabis as having medicinal qualities and being used to cure a variety of different health issues. So that has kind of made youth confused, right? It's made them confused about really the perception of harm associated with both vaping and cannabis. So that's how we're going to start our presentation today. Okay, also current events. So I'm imagining a lot of you may have seen this. It's the Surgeon General put out an advisory. And actually, it's the first time they've put this advisory out around marijuana since 1982. And General Adams, our Surgeon General, was really clear in the report about the health risks associated with cannabis. And the three key things that are in this report that I want to highlight are that General Adams said the high rates of marijuana use among pregnant women and youth is one of the reasons why he issued this health advisory. He also mentioned that there's a widespread access to increasingly potent marijuana through legalization at the state level. And the last reason why he has decided to issue this particular advisory was because there was a mounting body of evidence of the harms to the developing adolescent brain. So we have a link to this, I think, so you might be able to look it up and look more deeply into this report. But basically, even though the laws have changed, the science has not. And really, the science suggests that there is a greater risk than ever due to these higher levels of THC. And I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. And while the perceived harm is decreasing, the actual potential of harm is increasing. Okay. So, moving on. This slide is looking at a public health alert that we just issued here that our Dr. Matt Willis, our public health officer, issued. And you should have got a copy in your packet, so it's included there. The full health alert is there. And there's been a lot of attention put to the pulmonary injury that's been associated with vaping. I'm not sure if you've seen the news, but there's been quite a few articles and stories recently about this. The CDC has reported that there are 450 possible cases of severe lung illness associated with the use of e-cigarette products. And they've actually confirmed 5 deaths around this issue. And I think the one thing I really want to bring to your attention is that, the FDA recalls vegetables when there may be a risk of salmonella outbreak, but they have yet to do so with vapes, with these vaping devices. And so what's happened as a result of that, since the FDA hasn't yet responded, that medical experts, including our local public health officer, have really been proactive about this and are encouraging that all vaping actually stop until we understand more about what is causing this particular illness. We just don't have enough information at this time, and they're still investigating. So that is the recommendation, and that's what the health alert talks a little bit more about. Okay. I also just wanted to bring your attention to a recent article that was speaking to this pulmonary health issue that is listed here, and it also cites the public health expert alert that was just recently issued. So why are we here too? This is local California Healthy Kids Survey data. We administer that here in Marin County schools at the 7th, 9th, and 11th grade. And you can't obviously see the numbers on this slide. It's very difficult to see. But what you can see is that from the older data is in that gray the gray bar, but in the new data is the green bars. And in every single category, the first part of the slide is looking at ever using marijuana. And this is for 11th graders. And as you can see, it has changed from the last time we did the survey to the most recent time we did the survey in every category for grade 7th, actually 9th and 11th grade. And then the last one is, this is ever used, but the last section over here is really looking at last use in 30 days, so recent use. And again, that has increased in every single category. And when you look at that compared to the California statistics, what we've seen is that 31% has ever tried, this is again among 11th graders, have tried using marijuana, compared to 14% who currently use. And our numbers here in Marin County are higher than those numbers at the state level. So this is one of the reasons why we're here. And I'm going to pass it over to Jazzy now so she can talk about nicotine.
All right, hello. I think this mic's working. So I'm here. I work in youth tobacco prevention and education with Bay Area Community Resources. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nicotine side of things. But like Melissa mentioned, it is a triangulum. We can't really talk about nicotine nowadays and vaping without considering the impacts of cannabis use being intermingled with those. So it's the technology device, the nicotine product, and the marijuana product, and the intermix of all of that. So in 2017, 2018, we saw a huge increase in youth e-cigarette use in all of our schools. So this is Marin County data. We saw that in the middle, this middle graph, I know it's hard to see, but we actually doubled in every single category for 7th, 9th, and 11th graders for use of e-cigarette products in the last 30 days. That was very alarming. and that was a cause for concern. So we started to look more into that, look into the products and what was actually going on. And so, yeah, we are at 28% of 11th graders in Marin County have used in the last 30 days, and that's almost a third of our 11th grade students who are using these products is a habitual use of these products. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so kind of nicotine vaporizers and vaporizers in general. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. But there's tons of different types of vaporizers. And raise your hand in the room if you're under 18 years old. Raise your hand, keep your hand up if you see a product on there that you recognize. There's a whole handful of you, and I'm sure that all of you recognize at least one of those products that's up there. You can put your hands down now. So nowadays, you guys are faced with something that has never happened before. Everybody else in this room doesn't really know what's going on in the high schools and the middle schools except for you guys. So it's really important for you to understand what these products are, how they work, and how they're being marketed and what's in them. So as we go through these, we're going to do this just really quickly. The basic anatomy is you have a battery. The battery heats up this atomizer, that metal piece up there, if you look at the top picture. And then you have the e-liquid concentration, which is in the mouthpiece usually, and that gets put onto the top of the device. You have pod-based systems, which are pre-loaded pods, and they have measured out amounts of nicotine concentrations or cannabis concentrations. And then you have these intermix ones where you actually refill them on your own. For example, Thorin, a really popular one in the upper right-hand corner, that's a refillable one, so you can actually put your own amount of e-liquids in there. Juul, the most popular e-cigarette company on the market in the US currently. I put that down there. I'm sure many of you have heard of that company. And then we have tanks and all these different types of versions of pod-based systems. So kind of cigs in a pod. So I wanted to go over this because this is a pretty common misconception for a lot of young people and adults. So for 1 pack of cigarettes, and you have about 20 milligrams of nicotine. So you've got about 1 milligram of nicotine in each cigarette. So as you're smoking a cigarette, you're just slowly going through 1 milligram of nicotine. So then we have Juul pods. Juul pods, as listed on their website and in many other places, have 41.3 milligrams of nicotine. A lot of people think, oh, 1 pod equates to 1 pack of cigarettes, but it's actually slightly over 2 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine, which is a lot of nicotine in that 1 pod. Then we have Fix, another really popular one among young people that has 75 milligrams of nicotine. That's over 3 packs of cigarettes. And then Sorin, which, like I said, it's pre-filled, so you can actually get different concentrations, so it'll look differently. But it can have around 90 milligrams of nicotine, which is over 4 packs of cigarettes. So it's important to just really think about these potency levels. Back in the day when you're smoking cigarettes, you couldn't inhale a whole cigarette worth of nicotine in one go. But nowadays, young people here, they are able to inhale that much nicotine, and I know the slang term for it is getting domed or whatever the students talk about. I have about 20 high school interns, and they talk about it all the time. So it's important to know that what's happening to you when that's happening is you're inhaling a full cigarette worth of nicotine in one go, and it's cutting off the oxygen to your brain, and you're getting nicotine toxicity in your bloodstream. So that's what's happening. So I'm just going to go through this. Nicotine and cannabis delivery systems, we see that they are almost one and the same. These 2 products started as one company, and it was Pax Labs, which ultimately turned into the Pax device. They were co-patented in their shape and design. We have Juul, which is the offshoot company from that. That's an e-cigarette company. And Pax over here is a cannabis company. So when we talk about these, we see that these companies are intermixing in a really intense way. The tobacco industry spends billions of dollars to partner with the cannabis industry, and we've seen a lot of alcohol businesses buying into cannabis products as well. So it's important to recognize who's behind all of it. So the vaping health risks, so I'm going to stick to nicotine, and I know Melissa's going to go into the cannabis health impacts. But for the nicotine health impacts, we know that there's early DNA damage attributed to vaping e-cigarettes, which is early signs of cancer, but we'll see. It's going to take more time before evidence shows that there is cancer related. It does double the risk of heart attack. That's the case with any nicotine product because your blood pressure increases when you have nicotine in your blood system. Then you have increased rate of seizures among young people. There's been a huge uptick in the reported cases. However, that's not directly attributed to e-cigarettes at this time. It's likely that another study will come out that is attributing that to e-cigarette use. However, at this current time, that's not a direct correlation. And then there's development of wet lung, which is a pneumonia-type symptoms. There's been a couple cases of this, like I mentioned, that it's not directly attributed to e-cigarette use. However, there's some close correlations. Diacetyl is the chemical that does cause popcorn lung. We have not seen this chemical being used in many products. It's usually in cheaper devices. But it's important to recognize that chemical actually can impact your lungs and cause scar tissue and breathing issues. And then I put explosions on there because most of the deaths reported to e-cigarette use and attributed to them are from devices exploding. There is a whole list of guidelines to avoid that from happening. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's usually fatal and really harmful. So commingling, so I just wanted to touch on this. So basically, we see commingling between the substances all the time. And I am in the tobacco field and I hear about all of these different types of things. But for example, a couple of those are blunts, which are hollowed out cigars. A cigar is a tobacco leaf and it's filled with cannabis products. Caviar, that's like a different mix. I guess it's not really what we're talking about, but that's adding crack cocaine to different blunts. Roll your own spliffs. So a spliff is this one right here. That's when you're actually mixing the tobacco and the cannabis into rolling papers generally. And then we're seeing mix your own cocktails, and that's where vaping comes in, is we're actually seeing that people are mixing cannabis products and nicotine e-liquids into the same device. And that's something that we're very concerned about because we don't know the implications of nicotine vaping and let alone cannabis vaping as well. And I'll pass it back to Melissa.
Okay, so we're going to go a little bit more into depth about cannabis. I want to start off by just mentioning some terms and definitions. They're probably really common terms you might have heard, but there are several strains of the cannabis plant, things like cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, ruderalis is another strain. Sometimes when you think about cannabis sativa, it would be more like the energizing type. If you went to like your local bud tender, they might tell you that to use that to increase your energy. And for the indica ones, that would be more for to kind of a sleep aid or to help calm. So that's how they're usually marketed. And then there are also several compounds inside the cannabis plant itself that affect the brain. So they look at affecting cognition, memory, emotion, sense of time, coordination. And I'll talk more in depth about what the kind of effects they have on the body. But you probably have heard THC, and that's tetrahydrocannabinol. And that's the principal psychoactive component in cannabis. And then there's cannabinoid, it's hard to say, secondary compound. That tends to be less psychoactive than THC. Okay, moving on. So these pictures here, this basically what I want to point out, these are the concentrates, and they don't look like your average, cannabis plant, right? They don't look like bud anymore. They don't look like the flower. So you have, names like crumble, crystalline, sugar, distillate, shatter, butter. These are highly potent THC concentrated products, and we'll be talking a little bit more about how they're actually consumed. But I just wanted to bring your attention that they don't look like the flower anymore, so they might be hard to spot. So today's cannabis, why are we so concerned? Well, a lot's changed in just a short amount of time with regards to the potency of THC especially. So we're looking at roughly 11% THC, and that's actually more like an average across the US. And if you actually look locally here, we're pretty close to the Emerald Triangle. So here, actually, if you go into a local dispensary, it's likely even your smoked cannabis is going to be closer to a 35%, more like the medical grade. But this is kind of the average across the US. And then, as I mentioned, those concentrates on the previous page, the shatter, the honey oil, the waxes, et cetera, really averaging around 40 to 80%, but they go all the way up to 99% THC potency. Something to consider. And things we know about cannabis, right? It's still considered a Schedule I Drug Enforcement Administration drug on the federal level. So it is not legal on the federal level. the vaporizers and the dab. So you saw earlier some pictures already of these different devices that Jazzy pointed out. But really what I want to bring to your attention again is that there are some of the devices that actually allow you to smoke the bud or the flower, as you see up in the top there. But most of these are, the dab pens, for example, are really about the wax concentrates. And those are the ones that are the 90 to 100% THC potency. And that's the ones that we're most concerned about. Here, even local retail outlets, we've seen concentration of the THC for the oils, which tend to have lower THC content, still around 80%. Okay, so these cartridges that Jazzy already mentioned a little bit about this, but the cartridges that have been developed are really now available to purchase through, retail outlets and even through the cannabis delivery companies, and they are able to fit generally in both devices now. They're mixed cartridges. You can get nicotine mixed with cannabis, just nicotine. You can even get devices that are just like essential oils. So there's a lot of different things you can be putting in these devices. Okay, let's talk about how you might consume cannabis. So 3 primary ways of consuming it: you're smoking it or vaping it, so in an inhalation type format, or there's an oral edible, you might be actually ingesting it. And then lastly, there's these sublingual type of tinctures and tablets that you can actually put under the tongue. So why I brought this slide up just to kind of show you is that it varies in how long it takes in your body to feel the effect, depending on how you're consuming it, and also varies how long it stays in your body, depending on the type of ways you're consuming it. So generally with smoking and vaping, you are going to feel effect pretty fast after smoking marijuana, and it would only last technically around 3 to 4 hours. That's the general duration it'll last in your body. But with the oral edibles, which is where we also are very concerned, is that it can take some time before you actually feel the effect, even up to an hour sometimes it takes to be able to feel the effect, and it can last in your system for 6 to 8 hours. Very troubling. So. And then with the oral, that does depend. Well, usually within a few minutes you're feeling, with a half hour, you're feeling the effects of the oral sublingual consumption. Okay, so what are the effects by cannabis? First of all, I wanted to start with really the psychosocial effects. And this is from the National Academies of Science. They put out a report in 2017 and actually looked at over 10,000 journal articles from peer-reviewed journals. So these are really valid research studies that were looked at. And from that report, we have seen that there was substantial evidence associated with cannabis impairing the performance in the cognitive domains of learning, memory, and attention. And the other big thing around it, which we also saw substantial evidence, is that it is related to impairments in the academic achievement, employment, income, and social relationships. So that's something really that we wanted to bring your attention to. Again, from this report, we also saw substantial evidence around the association between cannabis use and the development of schizophrenia or other psychoses with the highest risk among most frequent users. Before I go into that, actually, in our audience here, we have an addiction psychiatrist that works with the county, Dr. Mark Schiller, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark to just kind of talk a little bit to you about psychoses and give you a little more information around that.
Sure, thank you. Well, let me see what to say. But no, number one, not everybody knows what psychosis is probably, so just the definition of that. That's when people are hearing voices, that's one symptom. Another one is having delusions. So usually the delusions that come with marijuana are paranoia, so that you think somebody's after you or trying to kill you. Sometimes more bizarre, that the FBI has got you staked out. And then there's other associated symptoms in schizophrenia, which can be just lack of motivation, social inability, not thinking clearly, not speaking clearly in a lot of ways. So that's called a thought disorder. There's no question that marijuana causes this. And I think many of us are fooled because you may be old like I am, and, back in the day, you wouldn't see psychosis with the grade of marijuana that was prevalent at the time. We see as Mel was saying, marijuana around here, that's usually about 7 times as strong as what was available back in the day. So we know that particularly the risk of kids or people who started smoking when they were under 18, probably under 16, have a quite prominent greater risk of psychosis. So for those kids who are using as kids and then as adults who become heavy users, they have at least a 4 times rate of psychosis later in life. And what I can tell you is that that's common now in clinical care. I mean, so my colleagues and I are constantly talking about, wow, I didn't used to see all this psychosis for people smoking marijuana or using edibles or whatever other format they're using, but we're seeing it all the time. It's really phenomenal. And the other thing that's scary, and I think maybe Mel is going to bring up specifically, is there are certainly temporary psychoses that we see that are caused by marijuana, and they often do resolve, sometimes after a fair amount of time, but we are now seeing chronic psychoses that don't stop, and they keep on going. And it's thought, in fact, that marijuana can cause schizophrenia in certain people, and there's certainly people that I see that, maybe it's schizophrenia, maybe it's not, maybe it's drug-induced or not, but they're really not clinically different than the schizophrenic patients that I see. And it's really a phenomenon in the work that we do. Oh, no, certainly methamphetamine, cocaine can cause psychosis, and, if you're adding meth to marijuana, I'm sure you're increasing your risk of psychosis greatly, but we see it with people that are just using marijuana. And again, the most important thing, I think, is that teens don't start using marijuana. I mean, there's no amount of marijuana, really, I think, that is safe, as the Surgeon General brought out. But the risk really is tremendous, and we're seeing it all the time in a clinical sense.
Thank you, Dr. Schiller. So moving on to talk a little bit more about the risks with the adolescent brain development associated with cannabis use. So we found that teen brain has actually responded differently to the cannabis plant and use than the adult brain. And we see that regular use among youth can cause long-term damage, as we talked a little bit about this, to developing structures. We already talked a little bit about psychoses, but really, what we're looking at is that for developing brains, this may change those brain pathways permanently. So that's the real concern I want to bring up, is that permanently part. So there are other associated harms with cannabis, and so one is around poisonings. And what we mean by that, we've seen in our emergency departments an uptick of cannabis-related unintentional intoxication, generally among toddlers, but also among middle school and high school students. We are seeing an increase in emergency department visits, and that's really concerning. And these are some of the signs and symptoms you might see when, and also we're seeing it in pets. We're seeing animals, dogs that are also getting a hold of edible products and getting similar symptoms and becoming poisoned. So another harm associated with cannabis use is, this is also another difficult one to say, but cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, also known as CHS. And this is like a very severe vomiting condition. And this we're also seeing here in our emergency department, an increase of this condition as well. And it's strange, but hot showers seem to actually help relieve the symptoms associated with this particular condition, which is a strange thing. That and then also can lead to acute kidney injury, unfortunately, because it can cause severe dehydration in a person that might have this. So, another concern. And as I mentioned earlier, edibles. So, these are actual products that are currently on the market, and that actually was a advertisement that was in Alameda County on a billboard. So, and I really think that's poignant because it is true, marijuana has arrived. And although these products, a lot of them were available during the time when marijuana was available as a medicinal product only, what's happened since it became a recreational legalized product, the market has boomed. There are so many different products you can get, different types of edibles, and I try to give you a variety here in this images. It goes from chocolates to gummies to drinks to popcorn even. There's even a taco seasoning mix, there's ice cream. I mean, there's all these different products that are available. And although they're right now, as part of the legalization, it does require that these products are inside child-proof packaging, but once that product gets out of the package, a brownie is a brownie is a brownie. So a child may not know if it's sitting on a counter or an individual that that brownie is, filled with pot. All those labels are no longer on top of that item. So I think that's the real concern, as you can see. Okay. Edibles. Great. I want to talk a little bit about why we are so concerned about edibles. I talked a little earlier about when you consume it, how long it takes to actually feel the effect, and then also just the concern with how long it stays in your body. But basically, we've seen now that some of the edible products can actually be more potent than some of the smoked or vaped flower. And as I mentioned, if you are unsure and you're not starting to feel effect, what we've seen, and the reason why there's a high risk for this intoxication, severe intoxication, is that often people with like a little gummy bear, you take a little, part of the toe and you eat your gummy bear and you're not feeling your effect. That's about 10 milligrams maybe. So you might eat another toe or you might eat the arm, and you keep eating and eating until you start feeling the effect. But it's taking a while for your body to feel that. But by the time you've consumed multiple milligrams of it, you might have a risk for severe intoxication by that point. And that's happened, and we're seeing that. And like I mentioned, it does take a lot longer to start producing that effect than smoking cannabis does. And let's see, it also takes a lot longer, as I said, to clear your body. So if you're having a really bad hallucinogenic trip from taking a lot of edibles, that could stay in your body for quite some time, and it's very troubling for individuals that are experiencing that. And like we've mentioned, it can lead to a psychotic episode, some temporary, and what we're seeing with these really high potency products, as Dr. Schiller mentioned, it might be a more permanent case of psychoses. And it even can lead to serious cardiovascular events, including heart attacks. So very concerning. Okay, so I talked a lot about the health concerns associated with cannabis, and I want to talk a little bit more about what we're trying to do here in Marin County to help to address these issues. And some of you might be familiar with what the spectrum of prevention is, but really it's looking at a set of strategies that we're trying to implement here, and we're focusing on things like cannabis ordinances. That's the first level of the spectrum, looking at the influencing policy and legislation. And we're trying to also really here tonight, like we're trying to do community education, individual education, and whatever we can. But we find that the best approach is really to a combination of all these different approaches and strategies. I've talked a lot about Prop 64, but I wanted to really bring your attention, when this product, cannabis, was legalized, a lot of times when we're talking to folks, folks really voted to decriminalize the use, and decriminalize possession and cultivation for individuals over 21. That's really what Prop 64 was talking about. And I don't think people really understood that it was going to grow into this level industry that it is, and accessibility that you might be able to have, and all those products that you saw. So that's something I think I just want to bring your attention to. We really looked at the idea that it's more about decriminalization, and it's really evolved into a whole different situation. So what are we doing here in Marin County, and what's happening around local cannabis policy? So we actually have an action team, and I'll talk a little bit more about that was devoted to looking at the current ordinances that are taking place. And I think, Josie, you'll be talking a little bit about the law and the trends here as well. But really what I want to show is that there has been some ordinances passed already. Here in unincorporated Marin, there's something called McDory, and that's actually still only medicinal cannabis, and there are 4 allowed retailers, but they are delivery only. And City of San Rafael, same idea. They're allowing medical and adult use delivery. And the town of Fairfax, again, there are no retail storefronts at this point currently. But there's still 2 jurisdictions that are undecided. That's the City of Novato and Larkspur. So they're going to look at the potential for recreational storefronts, and that's still beyond the docket. So why does policy matter? Why are we doing the work that we're doing around it? So, I mean, really what we're looking at is that without policy and regulations in place, it really can lead to this lower perception of harm, along with really allowing for more opportunities for individuals to purchase and obtain cannabis. And what we see in the research is that increased access goes to increased use. I mean, that's established, and we've seen that quite a bit. So that's a concern for us. I mentioned that we have an action team devoted to this work here locally. It's called the Marin Prevention Network, and Mike introduced me as kind of overseeing that. And we do have primary goals of doing cannabis education like we're here tonight. We're trying to work on policy development and looking at existing ordinances and see how we might amend or work to create new policy. And we're also looking at how we might help to increase enforcement. And there's a few apparent resources. So in the packet you should have gotten your access to this particular link here. And this is actually Let's Talk Cannabis. It's through the California Department of Public Health. They put out this campaign, and there's several fact sheets available that you can download from this website. And it is really good information. It's current, up-to-date information. So I recommend that if you want to get some more, there's even a tip sheet on how to talk to youth about vaping and cannabis. And also should be included in your packet is it's a full tip sheet. This was through the Surgeon General as well. And it can give you more information about how to talk to your youth and more about vaping. So the links are there. Hopefully, if you have questions too, we're going to have time at the end to address your questions. I think I'm turning it over to Josie at this point.
Thank you. I do not have a PowerPoint, and I don't do well with standing still, so let's see how this goes. The whole purpose of this is education, correct? Thank you. One person was listening to me. That's rad. One of the things, would you mind turning the lights up behind you or pushing on lights or seeing what happens? Yeah, let's give it a shot and see what happens. Awesome. Thank you. One of the things that I get to do is I get to deal with your kids and see what your kids are doing in school. And for a lot of parents, I'm a wake-up call because I place a phone call and then I have this very bewildered parent who doesn't know what their child has gotten caught with. They don't know what their child is doing. They don't understand why their child could be in trouble. Or conversely, they know all these things and they've provided this to their child. And that happens frequently. And so the first thing that I want to mention, and I realize that this is switching gears from all this information and education portion, but I'm going to go more towards the blunt education, pardon the pun, but this is what I'm seeing. So I'm seeing parents who utilize marijuana, who utilize cannabis, who utilize various forms of medicinal marijuana in their homes, providing it to their children. So if that is something that you are doing, be aware of what you're modeling. If that is something that you are condoning in your home, be aware of what you're modeling, because it's very easy to sit across from the cop and have your kid dime you out and say, oh, well, my mom gets high all the time. That's a moment that I get to share with your family, and it's very awkward, but it happens a lot. But for those of you that have no idea about any of this, Google is your friend. Before I came here tonight and before I go to any presentation, I Google my topic because I want to see the number one thing and I want to see about the first maybe 5 things, and I go a few different search engines because that's what your kids can find. It's very easy. I went on Instagram and I looked up 2 types of devices and 2 types of edibles that I saw in my schools this week. I work Monday through Thursday. I have 38 schools in unincorporated Marin. I have received 4 photographs from administrators. Yep, that's the right number. 4 photographs from administrators this week alone on what they have found on their campus in the form of edibles and in the form of cartridges. I can tell you right now that like the Soren Air, that was really big 2 years ago. That was the thing with 6th graders 2 years ago. I haven't seen one this year. I haven't seen one last year. But I've seen a ton of edibles. I've seen 525 milligram cookies that you say they're childproof packaging. You know what defeats childproof packaging? Scissors. Not rock, paper, scissors, but scissors. What defeats the packaging that places have on things is a kid with determination. And so what I'm seeing and what we are actually seeing as a unit as far as law enforcement and as far as the responders for these kids is that kids can overdose on marijuana. Is there anybody that knew that? Just like, oh yeah, totally, you can totally OD on weed. There's only a few of you. You can overdose on marijuana. It's not pretty. The hyperemesis, anybody like morning sickness? Any of the moms in here enjoy morning sickness? Because that's what too much marijuana will do. Hyperemesis means lots of vomit. And it's really fun when we get called to a school because your kid is just yarfing their brains out and they say they haven't done anything. And it turns out that they've been eating edibles. So the consequences, now what? What happens when I make that call? What happens when somebody makes that call? There's a couple different roads. I am not good with this, talking with my hands. I'm going to put this right here. I can't talk then. The consequences, there's a couple different roads. There's the criminal road, which involves probation, which involves probation officers, which involves going before a judge and owning up to what you've done and explaining things, involves community service time, involves fines. And that's only if you just get popped with the stuff. Heaven forbid you get in a car high and you drive, or you take your bike and you hit a kid in a crosswalk and you're high out of your mind, or even just a little high, because it's not that big of a deal, right? It's just weed. I hear that every week. It's just weed. Yeah, it is just weed, except it's also just wine. It's also just a knife. It's also just anything if you want to downplay something. However, when you commit an act that is illegal and then you harm someone in the process, it doesn't become just anything anymore. And so you've got probation side of things. You've got the criminal side of things. Then we have the other side of things, the restorative practices. We have youth court, we have diversion, we have counseling, we have sometimes medical interventions for those that are overdosing on things. And all those teams, all those factions have to get together and help. Diversion programs are based in restorative practices, in understanding the mistake that has been made, the impact that it has within the community. And by community, I mean the first responders. I mean your parents who have to take time off work. I mean the cops that have to show up. I mean the people that have to help you get to and from the programs you have to go to, the emergency room nurses. So it's a much bigger picture. So oftentimes community impact statements, community impact projects, restorative projects are what we utilize for kids to try to divert them. That's what diversion is. You're trying to send them down. It's those choose your own adventure books. I'm dating myself a little bit because high school was like 23 years ago for me. 22? Math is hard. But it's one of those things where we're trying to send you the right direction. And we want to give kids this chance. But I can tell you right now, I went on Instagram before I got here, literally sitting in my car in the parking lot, not while driving. And I pulled up 3 sites from the edible packaging that I got off kids this week. And they say must be 21 to follow. But the pages are public. I went on YouTube and I typed in just the name of one of the edibles and I got some of the dumbest videos I've ever seen in my life. Because these kids are high out of their mind and they're telling you how to use your cartridge better, how to modify things better. It's out there and it's to be seen. And so for those of you guys that aren't paying attention with your children, that aren't paying attention to what they have, or didn't know. I mean, I learn every week a new vape device because I'm taking one off a kid. And sometimes the parents are mad because they paid for it. And that's too bad. But what we're seeing is that people don't understand that there's consequences to the actions on the legal side of things. And so the last little part, and I think I have about a minute left, is that this is the fastest but slowest I've ever spoken, is that if you are a kiddo who gets busted and you want to apply for financial aid, this can hinder that. I realize that we are in what is perceived to be an intensely wealthy community, but I know there's plenty of people here that are just hardworking, normal folks and don't have diamond shoes. So that can influence your financial aid. If you'd like to have a job where you have to drive, that can screw that up for you. Because if you have a conviction for a DUI, which you can get with marijuana, because it's just weed, you can't necessarily drive for that employer. If you have many of these things in your record, if you have tried a diversion path and it didn't work, or if you have continued the behavior and things have now had to go criminal, this is actually on your record. And I don't think that kids realize that, and I think a lot of them don't care, and that's okay. That's job security, and that's job security for us to continue educating. And it's job security as parents to show you guys that you are still needed. And for those of you guys that are here, I appreciate so much the fact that I don't think I've been on the other end of a phone call with any of you guys. And if I have, it's because I haven't seen your faces yet. So we'll meet next week. But I'm serious. I have some hearings scheduled for next week. I'm probably going to meet a few of you guys, and that's fine. I'll be the same way now as I am then, minus this thing. But you guys need to understand that if I have weed on a school campus, I can send you immediately to probation, as can any law enforcement officer. We don't have to give you diversion. We don't have to give you the options. We want to. Our whole purpose is so that we don't screw up your future because you guys made a mistake. Kids make mistakes. That's what they do. That's what you are hardwired to do. But it's how you respond to those mistakes. And when you screw up that hardwiring by being high out of your mind, and then you're puking all over my patrol car, that's a mistake I'm going to remember a little more. And maybe that diversion is going to include explaining how to clean a cop car or how to get vomit smell out of your mom's shoes. And I'm totally serious. I've assigned this to kids before. But remember that you guys will screw up, and you guys need to take opportunities. What, I'm done? That's it? You guys need to take advantage of the opportunities for education so that you can realize not only are you just screwing up and inconveniencing yourself for a short period of time, but you can screw up your brain. You can screw up so many things for your future, whether it be unintentionally or intentionally. And for those of you that are here, there's now no excuse for you to ever get caught doing this. Just FYI, sorry. I'm glad you guys are here, but if I have to deal with you outside of here, I'm going to be a whole lot of I told you so. So I really appreciate you guys being here. We're going to stay and answer questions. Please feel free to ask. No question is weird. No question is dumb when it comes to stuff like this, but thank you guys for your
We're just going to go to Q&A.
You're asking me.
Tell us your personal one.
That's some good parenting tips.
Hello. So we're going to go to questions and answers. And is Ken here? So I'm going to do my best. We actually need to bring the microphones around so that we can capture your questions on the audio. So raise your hand and we'll do our best to get the microphones out to you. So you got one up here.
Share.
I have a twofold question. The stats you quoted about the last 30 days of trying in 11th grade, how are kids just volunteering that information? How accurate is it?
So I think that was the e-cigarette information. So basically, every 2 years, we have a survey that goes out to all students. It's called the California Healthy Kids Survey data. So yes, when it's kids who are on an anonymous survey online in their classes, they usually take it in the spring, so between March and April, I believe. And so they take that every other year, and that's where we get our data, but usually it's underreported. So you are correct. These numbers are usually projected to be lower than what's actually happening, and I'm sure a lot of students here in the room could probably agree with that and say that it's happening more often.
Okay, and the second question is, the high schools and middle schools, do you think they're doing enough? I know that's a kind of a political question, but I'm just intrigued.
Define enough.
Well, what would you change?
Oh, there isn't enough time for that.
Yeah.
As far as the educational
What are they
component,
doing?
all sorts of different things. As far as the educational component, aside from things like this, there is drug education, there is Red Ribbon Week, there is an inordinate amount of information that is available to kids, as well as the student handbooks, the parent information nights, back to school night, any of the things that come home to kids, as well as things on campus. I mean, and you guys can speak about that as well. There's tons of stuff.
So one program that is on many campuses, not all campuses, is the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program. It's a statewide tobacco education program. It's a grant that actually gets funded through Marion County Office of Education, and there's a consortium. So there's a bunch of schools that are a part of that, and they do get tobacco-specific education. At the state level, we haven't seen funding come in, enough funding from cannabis money at this point, that doesn't exist. But with tobacco specifically, we do have a solid foundation. There are curriculum that are free and online through the Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. They now have a Stanford Marijuana Prevention Toolkit as well. So there's a lot of really great resources that we do distribute to all of the schools in Marin County so that they have access to free curriculum and lesson plans around these topics.
And on the cannabis side, I just wanted to speak to that there are, right now, currently about 20 million is being allocated to prevention efforts. It has yet to be distributed, but there is around $20 million that's coming out of Prop C4 that's been identified for prevention on cannabis and other drugs.
I'm wondering, I don't understand what a dab pen is exactly.
Yeah, I'll speak to it. So a common misconception for young people is that a dab pen and a cannabis vaporizer are kind of interchangeable terms. A cannabis vaporizer has cannabis oils in it, and a dab pen has concentrates and waxes. So it's actually has to heat up to a higher temperature in order to vaporize a concentrate that is a solid versus a liquid concentration. Do you have something to add to that, Josie? Yeah.
And what that stuff's made of is the nicest way to say this is that you can take nail polish remover and use it to extract the oils that you're going for. So when you're using a dab pen, you're inhaling a crazy amount of chemicals, even though people say these things are pure. But you are inhaling a very, very concentrated little nuggie. And it's, I mean, butane, acetone, sometimes brake fluid. So there's all kinds of amazing things that you're breathing in. So it's a different method of delivery that comes with a whole lot of other consequences.
And dab pens are generally more expensive. So if you're getting a cannabis oil vaporizer, like the PAX ones that we were showing above, you can get a cannabis oil vaporizer for fairly cheap, about the same as a Juul, like $30 retail. But a PAX dab pen is around like $200. That's the difference in price point.
Hi, I have a question. So I've seen advertisements for vaping devices that don't have marijuana or nicotine, and it's just essential oil. And I'm wondering, do you think that is healthy or like unhealthy? Or what's your opinion on that?
And then, okay, I'll start that. But one thing that I've always learned and talk about is that no matter what it is, your lungs don't have the ability to break it down. So when we talk about substances that are on e-cigarette products and things like that, they have chemical compounds that are approved substances by the FDA. And they're approved for the purpose of food preservatives, which go through your stomach and can get digested and get out of your body. However, a lot of those substances, they didn't think that they were going to start to inhale them. So now we're seeing them coat the lungs, and we don't know the long-term impacts since they've only been out for 11 years or so. So ultimately, whatever it is, it's really hard for lungs to break down anything. Even if there's a big fire that happens and you're walking around outside, that's going to impact your lungs. So no matter what it is, it's going to have an effect on your lungs.
And the only thing I wanted to add to that too, besides essential oils, there are some things for like dieting purposes. You might see other types of vaporizers, other liquids that are being marketed for a variety of things. So I just wanted to mention it's not just essential oils you might find.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It's great to have somebody else talking to my child besides myself. But I'm curious about the term addiction. Psychological dependency versus physical addiction. And I know that a lot of people get confused with nicotine associated with cigarettes and the cancer issue, but it's really the nicotine that causes the addiction to the tobacco, and that's a whole different issue. So now can smoking marijuana with, vaping devices, nicotine, cause a physical addiction to marijuana, and that's a serious issue that I didn't see or hear here. So is marijuana on its own, I guess it's a two-part question, is it physically addictive or psychologically dependent, and does vaping enhance that significantly, and that would be a big issue?
We're going to let Dr. Schiller answer that.
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about addiction, I mean, that's a sort of a lay term, and we're talking about physical dependence and psychological dependence. There's no question that marijuana by itself has psychological dependence. A lot of people don't think that it has a physical dependence, but we do know that it does. We know that if you smoke regularly and smoke a lot, even when your THC levels in your blood drop, you can get irritable, anxious, have personality changes. And then when we do different types of studies, imaging studies and other, we can see some of the effects of long-term marijuana use, and that lead to that, that kind of demonstrate that physical dependence as well. Adding tobacco or something else can accelerate that process, but marijuana on its own is addictive in that lay sense.
From the back. Does somebody have a question in the back?
I heard someone talking about the dab pens, but what else are you inhaling when you dab with an actual rig?
There's several chemicals, and it really depends how the extraction process is done. We're seeing that with a lot of the e-cigarettes. It's similar to what you find in cigarettes in some of the cases. Hundreds of chemicals. Would you like to?
Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to touch on about that is like the cheaper products usually have more chemicals in them.
I'm talking about like a rig.
Yeah, so you have, but the concentrate to have the dab concentrates.
The wax?
Yeah, the waxes. So the waxes, that's what the chemicals come from, right? So you have your waxes, and the way that it gets extracted, they usually use a specific type of chemical. So we've seen, like butane, for example, is a really common chemical that they use in the extraction process to turn it into a concentrate, or hexane, another really popular one for different dispensaries, or they have some forms of like heat fusion ones. But ultimately, they are not required to tell us what they're using to do the extractions and how it's being done. So when you have packaging and things like that, they don't have to tell you what those chemicals are. And so it's kind of a little bit of the gray area, the unknowns. But those chemicals to extract those waxes, that's what's definitely concerning.
Does everybody know what butane is?
Yes.
Lighter fluid. Yeah, so you smell barbecue, somebody starts a barbecue with some lighter fluid, that's what you're inhaling, right in your lungs.
Over here? Can we have a mic?
Yes, hi. This might sound a little bit naive, but my question is about detection. So, smoking there's an odor, there's a smell, but those vaping and edibles, they're like advices how we can spot things?
So, I'm glad that you're asking that. One of the things that cracks me up is that kids think that you can't smell the unicorn farts or the mermaid tears or whatever it is that their liquid is flavored or scented as, and you can. A lot of the things that come with those, you're looking more for the actual items. You're looking more for the devices. You're looking for the chargers. You're looking for, and she's got some excellent examples, but you're also looking at signs in your kid or signs in your people. And so mood swings, changes in behavior, they sneak out real quick to go do something, they come right back and they seem totally fine. You may not smell something, but then suddenly their behavior shifts. So it's kind of a threefold approach, is looking actually for the device, and then the liquids. And if I can tell you right now, because I had one break in my patrol car, my car smelled like strawberry for like a week. It does have a very strong smell. Smell your kid's hands. Smell your kid's breath. You're their parent, you made them. Get right up in there and give them a sniff and see. And if your kid knows that you're gonna be checking them, they're less likely to do so. I've had plenty of kids get really cheesed off at me after things like this because they said that their parents are more on them. But be aware of what they're carrying in their pockets. Be aware of what they have in their bags. Be adulting for them. Parent, like vigorously parent for a little while, and you'd be surprised what you can find.
I have chargers and things you can look at too.
Yeah, we have visuals here if you want to come up at the after and you take a look, and you can smell some of the products here. They're very potent.
So I had a question about like the chemical effect of THC. So I know you said like nicotine like stops the oxygen going to your brain for a short while. So I was just wondering what the chemical effect of THC is.
It's a psychoactive component. I'll let Dr. Schiller, if you want to go into the really clinical aspects of it.
It does a whole lot of things, so it's not an easy question to answer. Mostly you have endocannabinoid receptors in your brain, and you're down-regulating these receptors. And basically, they're involved in sort of calming the brain in many ways. And what you're doing is you're kind of ending that calming, and you're, so you're getting some initial calming, and then you're getting agitation, and then at higher levels of THC, you can really lead to agitation of the brain. Like sort of, it sets up the psychosis, it sets up agitation, it sets up any number of effects. So you're basically just reversing what your receptors are really made to do, I think.
First off, thank you for coming and sharing your insights, and love the boots on the street perspective. The real is the real, and appreciate it. I find myself a little torn listening to some of this presentation. I kind of feel like I'm reading Reefer Madness over again, and wondering kind of what the goal and intent is. I think it's coming around nicely, and I guess I'm making more of an observation, but I have some stuff I want to say. First off, it comes down to parenting and having a real conversation with your kids and being responsible for your family. And it's tough to live in this county and watch so many people blame the system, blame other people, blame the school, and not take responsibility. Seeing presentations where people saying, well, we can't have a cannabis store here because that will encourage kids to smoke cannabis. Yet we've got a million liquor stores with bright neon lights everywhere, and that conversation is not being had. The evidence is showing that through regulation, you're getting better quality product. It is safer. It's not with lower end mixed hardware. It's not through cheap butane or ethanol extraction that is not cleaned up and therefore given all those chemicals. And all of your examples are right. It's out there. And the vast majority of that is black market stuff. The 525 milligram cookie, yeah, that happened under Prop 215. That doesn't happen under Reg 215. It doesn't happen under Prop 64. And the more we're driving our kids to go black market and grab crap that is bad for them, the worse off we're going to be. And the more we actually have conversations and help them understand the reality of this stuff.
So
I'll wrap it up real quick.
Oh yeah, do you have a question?
I'll say who I am in a second. I guess I would hope you guys will take this to the next level in your next presentation and help parents understand how to talk to their kids and not just try to scare them and shut them down because they're going to react against.
Let's get a reaction.
Yeah, so actually what's interesting is that I was in possession of the 525 milligram cookie wrapper that came from one of our middle schools. And it was retrieved from an Oakland, basically, convention recently. So while I can completely appreciate and agree with 100% that we need to talk to parents, the problem is that our educators, as was stated at the beginning, are in this room. They're the children. And so if your children, as your educators, are not receiving that from a parent, and not every parent cares as much, that is who we are reaching at this point. That is where we need to begin. And one of the amazing things with this is that we have so much education. We have people that work tirelessly to do this type of education because it's now coming into my elementary schools. And so while I can agree that it is a parenting issue by and large, there are so many things that parents can't do every single waking moment. And so I think it's important that we remember that it's not just the high schoolers and the middle schoolers that are affected, but it's the trickle down. And what you're saying about black market things, I can buy 5 black market things right now down the street. And our kids don't know the difference. So things like this is very important for parents to understand. This is parent education. This is where it begins, and this is where this message gets disseminated. And I welcome all the opinions, but I'd like to give you guys a chance to address that as well.
Yeah, I won't go much into it, but I think, we understand now with regulations, we actually do want to see more regulation happening, but it's very early in the stages of regulation. There's a lot to be done still, and the state's still trying to figure it out. And we know for a fact that black market products are showing up on the shelves of dispensaries right now. If you look at actually licensed cultivated the cultivation sites, there are very few sites that are actually technically cultivated, or that are licensed, the cultivation sites that are licensed. So there's no way that they're actually be able to supply all the regulated products to the current dispensaries that are happening right now. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of pop-up dispensaries that are not licensed, that are still selling, that a youth may not know, or a person going into it may not know is not licensed. So there's a lot of issues with regulations. There's a lot of issues with the black market. It's a lot more complicated than that. We're really here to just tell you the information that we have based on actual research. The documentation that I brought up was around the National Academy of Science. Like I said, it was over 10,000 articles internationally that they looked at, so scientists that were brought together to review this information. So I'm just presenting what we know from the current research.
That's fine.
Okay, we've got a question back here.
When you smoke wax, can you smell it?
Yeah.
You can?
Yep.
Even the dab pens?
She asked if you're smoking dab pens, can you smell it, and the wax, and you can.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for being here because I think that it's very important with this information. And we talked a little bit about blame and shame, but I think that it's not just like let's blame the parents or let's blame the kids or let's blame the schools, but I think it's a combination of everything. And if anything, we need to, I mean, if there's going to be any finger pointing, it should be to like Sacramento. I mean, some of us in this room have gone to Sacramento and say, why don't you label in the boxes, in the Juul, exactly what was labeled in the cigarettes now, after so many years where the cigarettes didn't label how dangerous they are, you know? So I think we should do that, you know, just go to Sacramento and talk to our to the authorities and say, hey, you know, you guys need to label, because some kids that are here don't realize. They think that it's, like you said, that they're not as dangerous as cigarettes, where in fact they're more dangerous. But my second question, somebody asked about what are we doing in school. I think we should like also translate stuff into Spanish, materials into Spanish, and I want to thank you for talking about the consequences, because sometimes we don't talk about the consequences. But now that we're here and we have some students here, I'm just curious if we can hear from them like about the access. Sometimes we don't hear about how they get the access to this stuff. And so I know you can do it through internet, and people are just getting stuff in the internet without the parents' permission. But I just want to also talk about bioaccumulation, and that's, you know, where you're talking about the brain and how, like, if you're 25 years old, you're now mature, your brain is mature. But if you're smoking this stuff before you're 25, you're permanently damaging your brain. Is that correct?
There is a potential for that, yes. Affecting the brain structures, yes. And you asked about where access is. I mean, there's an app called Weed. Yeah, we can ask the students if they want, but I can just give you, there's an app called Weed Maps, and you can essentially just put in where you live, and you can have a variety of delivery companies. A lot coming out of Alameda County. There's several delivery companies that will kindly come into Marin County to deliver products, and these delivery folks are not necessarily trained to look at the IDs and really know how to identify a fake ID. So yes, products are getting in the hands of youth.
Question in the back.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to make a quick correction for licensed dispensaries. They're part of a system called Metric, which is a state track and trace system, which makes sure that everything in a licensed dispensary is lab tested to make sure it doesn't have butane or any of the other chemicals in it that we're talking about. If a product does get into a licensed dispensary that comes from an illegal grower, like you were suggesting, that dispensary would lose their license. And the BCC, which is the Bureau of Cannabis Control, which monitors this, checks on the Metric site to make sure that everything is traced, things have to be disposed of. So I just wanted to point that out. My question, though, is I was informed today that there's something in some high school bathrooms that can detect vape smoke. And I was curious if that was true and if it was in many bathrooms. And I also wanted to know, if you were a legislator on a local level and you could make some type of regulations to affect this industry, what would you do to improve it?
I'll talk to the first thing. So the first question, you talked about the vape detectors. So they do exist. However, what I've heard about them from students is that if they blow vape into those detectors, it takes approximately 45 seconds before an administrative person will make it to the bathroom. So they are very knowledgeable, and students are the experts. They know this. They know how to get around this. They know that they exist, and they know how to beat them. So ultimately, that might not be the best approach. Although they do exist, they are $1,000 to install in each bathroom, and they're about $200 of maintenance fees every year. So when it does come to that as an intervention, that's kind of the cost associated with it. And then as far as legislatures, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, just briefly on that. So with regards to the testing, the testing does go on, but they aren't testing for all different chemicals. There are other chemicals that are still not on those lists. So we're actually on a statewide level, we're working to try and increase the types of chemicals they're testing for, first of all. So that's one thing I would recommend. That's more statewide. And with regards to regulation, yes, that's potential. They could lose their license, but the problem is that the regulation level is not happening. So there aren't the regulators out going to all of these folks, and even the Bureau of Cannabis Control is still trying to shore up and have staffing, but they have not yet gotten there. So.
Okay, so what I want to say is that it's 7:45. We promised we'd end there. We're going to have two brief questions. We're going to ask that they not be statements, but questions and brief responses. And then our panelists have promised to stick around after if you want to come talk to them one-on-one. Okay, so quick question.
The quick question is, I love the statement that the greatest ambassadors are the young adults in this room and in our schools. Are we developing a program both in middle school and in high school where these voices are heard among their peers?
So there is a tobacco use prevention education. The coordinator is back here in the room, and she runs a peer-to-peer education program for the different schools and trainings at Marin County Office of Education. And we have Don Carney here, who enables youth to talk about cannabis specifically, and he's working in Davidson Middle School this coming year to do peer-to-peer education with cannabis. When it does come to changing things in our communities, it is young people who are the forefront of that. And we've seen that with policies happening locally. If you've seen the tobacco flavor ban policies that have been moving forward in different jurisdictions, youth are the forefront of that, and they are the ones speaking at city council meetings, and they are moving it forward because they're angry and they're frustrated and they want change.
Okay, we're going to have one more question and brief answer, and then we're going to break.
Okay, my question is about going back to access. Is it a cash-based business? So my question is very specific. So can kids on the street, I mean, it's not legal for them to buy it. So they're buying it from people that are coming from Alameda or wherever you said they're coming from. Are they paying cash for that, or are they able to use other forms of payment?
So by and large, from what I've seen, is yes, it's cash-based. However, a Visa gift card is very easily used online. And so I've seen a shift maybe in the last 8 to 10 months where kids get a prepaid Visa gift card and they go online and they click a button that says, yep, I'm 18. And then it shows right up. And so while cash is easy in a more kind of rudimentary fashion, i.e. on the streets or going to a convention, a credit card, and a lot of times it is unfortunately their parents' credit card, and I'm not trying to throw blame, I'm trying to provide facts. It's very easy to utilize that on eBay, on Amazon, and on various other websites. So it's kind of a twofold answer on there.
Okay, so, go. I'm sorry, Melissa, you go ahead.
Yeah, just to let you know that right now that it's not federally insured right, on the banking side, so there's no banks technically. There's been a lot of discussion around the banking, around the cannabis industry, so it's a complicated process, but right now, because you can't federally insure a bank that's dealing with cannabis money, so it is a primarily cash-based only business. I'm sorry?
My son gets no cash.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good start.
So
That's what I'm just trying to,
right.
I'm trying to find different ways to deal with this situation. That's why I asked that.
That's a great question. And I think that one last thing I wanted to say was about Amazon Locker. A lot of kids are using, or youth are using Amazon Locker as a way to obtain the products where you may not know it's going to an Amazon Locker inside a Whole Foods.
Yeah, they did stop selling nicotine on Amazon, or nicotine jewel pods on Amazon, so that's definitely something that's good for parents here in this room, because I know that was a big access point.
Okay, everyone, thank you for hanging in here. I think homework anxiety got a hold of some of our audience, but we're glad the rest of you are here, and make sure you sign up on the sheets outside because we can send you information about upcoming events that are very similar to this. Thank you.